Hello and welcome. In today's video I will be making a British flag. The flag we know today is from 1801 and is the combination of the Irish cross of St. Patrick with the Scottish cross of St. Andrew and the English cross of St. George. So let's crack on. Officially the flag is broken down as being 30 units high and 60 units wide. The Red Cross of England is 6 units wide and the white stripes either side are 2 units wide. The White Cross of Scotland is also 6 units wide, and the Red Irish Cross is 2 units wide. So how do you translate these units into real-world measurements? Well, you start by deciding how high you want your flag to be, and I'm going to make mine 2 feet high and 4 feet long. So 2 feet is 24 inches. So all you have to do is take the 24 inches, in my case, and divide them by 30 units. And that will give you the real-world length of a single unit, which in my case is 0.8 inches. When drawing the pattern for the flag, you only need to draw half of the flag, because the other half is exactly the same, just upside down. And yes, I'm using a plank of wood, because I don't have a long ruler with me. I start by drawing a square 24 inches by 24 inches. I mark the midpoint on the 2 vertical lines for the position of the central red stripe. And to work out its width, all I do is take my single unit measure of 0.8 inches and times it by 6. I do this on the opposite edge as well and just join them with a line. I repeat this process to mark the vertical red stripe at the middle of the flag. I then mark and draw the white stripes either side of the red crosses, and the width of these is just calculated by 0.8 times 2. To draw the Scottish cross, you'll need to mark a point dead centre on the flag, and draw a line from this point to the corner. These lines mark the centre of the white diagonals, so from these lines mark outwards your 6 units of the Scottish cross and draw the lines. Now from the centre line mark upwards your 2 units and draw a line, and this becomes the Red Irish Cross. And that's it. As I mentioned earlier, you only need to draw one half of the flag to get all the pieces that you need. This is now all of the pieces cut out, and I won't be needing a pattern piece for the central red stripe because it's simple enough to just draw straight onto the fabric. We can also remove all of the duplicate pieces because we only need one version of each piece. So this piece and this piece are the same, so we can remove one. And this piece and this piece are the same, so remove one. And all 3 of these pieces are the same as these 3, so we can remove one. And these are the only pieces that we need. I want to give you a quick demo of the seam that we'll be using. You can see that one piece has 2 seam allowances, and the other piece has 1 seam allowance. I usually draw this single seam allowance with a pencil onto the fabric pieces themselves, so that there is something accurate for the piece on top to line up with. And you simply place the second piece along this line like so. You'll notice for the top piece the front side is facing up, and for the under piece the front side is facing down. We'll be sewing along this middle line, so you need to make sure that it meets the edge of the fabric underneath it. And also on the other side, the middle line must meet the edge of the fabric below it. For these top pieces, I usually just mark either end of this middle line with a pencil on the finished pieces, just enough so that I can align them correctly. Open the pieces out so that all front sides are facing up. Fold the top seam allowance around the one below it and just top stitch the edge down. The little excess on either side can just be cut off to leave a clean edge. To finish the patterns, we now need to draw all of these different seam allowances around them. On a fresh piece of paper, I trace around the patterns I previously cut and just draw all of the allowances around that. As I demonstrated, some edges will have 1 seam allowance and some edges will have 2. I tend to use 3/8 of an inch for a single seam allowance, and for the flag's edges I add 1 inch. I also mark what colour the piece is and how many to cut. And these are all of the finished pieces. Hopefully you can see how many allowances are on all of the edges. As I said earlier, I didn't need a pattern for the central red stripe, but on both of its long edges it has a single seam allowance, and on either of the short edges there is 1 extra inch for the flag's edges. I'm going to be using cotton for this flag, and I think this one is roughly 150 grams per square meter, but for all of the standard sizes I would say anything up to 200 grams is perfectly fine. So the next step is to lay all of your colours out, trace around the pattern pieces and cut them out. And these are now all of the pieces cut out and ready for sewing. I always begin by constructing this section first. And I like to lay the pieces out in order so I can keep track of where I am, because some pieces do tend to look alike. I usually start with the slimmest white and red pieces first to build up the Scottish cross. And as demonstrated earlier, take care to line up your single seam allowance marks. Pin the pieces together with as many pins as you want and just do your 2 rows of stitching. Next up is the wider piece to complete St. Andrew's cross. And again line up your marks, pin them together and sew. Next I attach the larger blue bit, attached in all the same way as before. And lastly the small blue bit to complete the Scottish and Irish section. And now on to the white section surrounding St. George's Cross, beginning with the small piece. Followed by the longer piece, which runs the whole length of this section. The next section to construct is the corner of the other side. And again, I like to lay out all the pieces so I can keep track of where I am. We can run through this section a bit quicker because all the steps are exactly the same as before. And here are the 2 constructed corners, and they are simply joined together with the first red piece of St. George's Cross. Once this section is complete, you will then have to repeat the whole process one more time to make an identical second piece. Just like this. Flip the second piece upside down, and this now becomes the lower half of the flag. And these 2 are joined together with the final red stripe of George's Cross running the whole length of the flag. And this is simply lined up, pinned and sewed exactly the same way as everywhere else on the flag. And it doesn't matter which side you sew on first, because both pieces are identical. At this stage the flag is basically completed, we just need to finish off the edges now. If you remember on the patterns I added a 1-inch seam allowance around the edges. So I now fold over this 1 inch and iron it for a crisp edge, and then fold this inch in half to conceal the raw edges and iron again, and then you can just pin this in place and sew. And this is how it turns out at the end. 2 rows of stitching is customary, but you can do more if you want to, some people do. And then just repeat this for the other 2 edges of the flag, leaving the other short edge undone, ready for the heading. The heading is the strip of fabric on the edge of the flag which houses the rope or the eyelets. And I like to use a slightly thicker cotton canvas to make mine, like this one. Draw out the height of your flag, in my case 24 inches, and add an extra 1.5 inches either side of this. And for the width of this piece I will go with 2 inches. But this can be anything you want depending on the type of fixture you are going with. I then add 1/2 inch allowance either side, and that's it. With the flag facing up, place this strip on top and pin in place. I have ironed over one of these seam allowances for ease later on. The extra 1.5 inches either side just fold around to the back and also pin in place. Once that's sewn on, you can now trim off most of this extra bulk. The next thing is to pull these flaps on either side upwards and sew them down. So lastly, with the flag facing downwards, you'll want to fold this strip in half and pin it in place and top stitch it down. And at the end, this is how it will look. Again, 2 rows of stitching is customary, but you can do more if you wish. On either end I have cut a round hole ready for the eyelets. So the final step is to just put them in place and hammer them on. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully it's been helpful to you, and I will see you again.